Hey, church family, I wanted to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement as we continue to pray for this coming election. Now, it's Election Day Eve, and I have no doubt that we're all ready to discover who's going to lead our nation for the next 4 years. If you haven't voted already, I encourage you to make plans to go and vote tomorrow. And listen, you ought to vote as if your vote is the deciding vote. At the same time, I want to remind you of something that the prophet Daniel said in Daniel chapter 2. It's there where he assures us of the fact that the Lord changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. It's in Daniel chapter 4 where the prophet Daniel doubled down on this by declaring, "The Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he will and sets over it the lowest of men." In other words, our God is the one who ultimately appoints people to positions of political power according to his perfect plan. It was God's will for President Obama to lead us for 2 terms. And it was God's will for President Trump to lead us for the last 4 years. Paul confirmed this in Romans chapter 13, where he declares, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God." Christian, listen, whoever wins this election, whoever is our next president, well, they've been appointed by God according to his perfect will. And while I encourage every person to go and vote according to biblically based convictions, I also encourage every Christian to rest in knowing that God is the one who gives the kingdoms of this world the leaders of his choosing. With that being the case, listen, we don't need to stress out about this election. We don't need to worry all night about who's going to be our next president. At the same time, I encourage you to consider a few quotes from our founding fathers, which should help us to grasp the importance of going and voting for leaders who have actually embraced the God of the Bible. Listen to the words of John Adams, who not only signed the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, but he was also the 2nd president of the United States. Here's what he said: "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." In other words, our Constitution will ultimately be rendered ineffective if our nation is given over to immorality and godless hedonism. We should also consider the words of James Wilson, who not only signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but he was also the original justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. And here's what he once said: "Human law must rest its authority ultimately upon the authority of that law which is divine. Far from being rivals or enemies, religion and law are twin sisters, friends, and mutual assistants. Indeed, these two sciences run into each other." Simply put, listen, the nation that loses sight of the divine law of God is the nation that will also fail to maintain justice for all. Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, as well as a ratifier of our Constitution, listen to what he had to say in his autobiography. He said that the gospel of Jesus Christ prescribes the wisest rules for just conduct in every situation of life. Happy are they who are enabled to obey them in all situations. Patrick Henry, who was also a ratifier of our Constitution, once declared this: "It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians, not on religions, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For this very reason, people of other faiths have been afforded asylum, prosperity, and freedom to worship here." Christian, listen, our nation was built upon the gospel of Jesus Christ, and our Constitution was written by Christian men who were committed to the Great Commission of Christ Jesus. And while this is not to suggest that the leaders of our nation have always been on the right side of history, the fact is that we all get many things wrong often. And yet the fact is that they created a Constitution which includes a self-correcting aspect to it, so that we, the people, can set out to correct the course of our nation if we get off base. We, the people, then ought to set out to protect the unalienable rights of every single citizen. With this as the goal, listen, it's time for Christians to rise up and correct the injustice that occurred when the Supreme Court decided to give women the right to abort their unborn babies. This was injustice, that this was in conflict with our Constitution. And listen, much like those days when the religious right stood up against the party that promoted slavery, it's time for the religious right to once again stand up against the tyranny of those who have claimed the lives of more than 60 million unborn babies. If you haven't voted already, I encourage you to go and vote tomorrow. And while there are several candidates to choose from, I encourage you to vote for a pro-life candidate who is committed to protecting the constitutional rights of those who are most vulnerable. Then, regardless of which leader the Lord actually appoints to lead our nation, I encourage you, Christian, let's continue fighting the good fight of faith, all for the glory of God.